Alright, so this video is about ecological relationships, and this is the target that we're going to talk about, that you can identify and describe a relationship in terms of symbiosis. And there are a couple of key terms to know with symbiosis, but let's begin by defining the term symbiosis so we know what it means. And symbiosis simply describes let me clarify, two kinds of organisms. So two different organisms of two different populations that live together. So it doesn't say what kind of relationship that is. So it is important to make that distinction or clarification. So let me, I guess, do a chart here. So we're talking about ecological relationships, and there are two main kinds. One of these is what we've been talking about in class, especially when we've done notes. So these are trophic levels or trophic relationships. We're talking about producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, decomposers. Those are all trophic levels about how one gets nutrients from the ecosystem and the communities in the environment. The other kind that we're talking about here would qualify as a type of symbiosis. And there are three kinds, and the first that we'll talk about is probably the one that you think symbiosis means, and that's mutualism. And this just means that both individuals or both organisms benefit, or they both gain. They have some kind of benefit. The next is parasitism, and this is when one organism gains or benefits, one organism benefits, but the other has a cost or is hurt in some way. And the last is one that we call commensalism. And this is when one organism benefits. Scroll down here. One organism benefits, and the other is unaffected, either positively or negatively. And so when we think about some examples of these, it's actually quite challenging to think about. So for mutualism, some that came up in class from first period and fifth period. We got sea anemone and clownfish. They help each other, and if you don't know how, go and look it up. It's interesting. We got sea anemone and clownfish. We've got, if you can think of the example of the bird on the back of a rhino or on an alligator or crocodile that cleans its teeth. You can think of lots of different examples, but here's another one that I want you to look up, and it's lichen. We'll come back to that example later in the future. Parasitism is when one organism benefits but the other doesn't. A good example of this is malaria or any kind of bacterial infection. Malaria is caused by a protist that's transmitted to our bloodstream via mosquitoes, and that protist lays its eggs in our red blood cells, and its effect is a condition that we call malaria. Commensalism is a very difficult example to think about. So the classic example that we think about is that we often use is barnacles on a whale. So the whale does the moving, the barnacles latch on, they move around, they get food because they're on the whale, but it is still a hindrance to the whale, so you might even qualify it as a parasite because the whale still has to exert some extra energy to move around and is carrying around the extra weight of the barnacles. So that's one example. Or the fish that clean up after other sharks. Clean up after sharks. Although those fish suction onto the sharks and catch a ride, and the sharks then have to transport those fish. So maybe that's another example of parasitism. It's very difficult to come up with an example, but those are some examples that might get you thinking a little bit about what these terms are that you need to know and be able to use. And that's it. That's the end of this podcast. So again, know that you'll have a podcast check, and let's see what you can make sense of this. All right. Goodbye.